Kamen Entchev here with Tom Casselman, ready for an awesome episode of Salute Your Sports. We're calling it the March Madness check-in with the Final Four field is set. We'll go ahead and pick the Final Four games and our champion as a whole because who knows if we have time next week. It's been a very interesting tournament. Lack of upsets. All four one seeds in for the first time since 2008. Actually, only the second time ever since the 1985 field of 64, then 68, etc. Just in general, Elite 8, Sweet 16 was loaded. I'll have more facts and figures in a little while, Tom. But, you know, it's one of those deals where it's kind of a catch-22. We love to see the upsets early on, but, you know, Florida Atlantic versus San Diego State, not really the most thrilling Final Four game, whereas Florida and Auburn, Duke and Houston, 2-1 seeds versus 2-1 seeds. At least that Final Four weekend should be absolutely epic. We'll talk about the best story of the tournament, the individual stars of the tournament. We'll pick the Florida-Auburn game. We'll pick the Duke-Houston game. And ultimately, who's going to win this whole dang tournament, Tom? I cannot wait to hear what you're going to say. I cannot wait to get started. We're recording just after the Michigan State-Auburn game, Sunday, March 30th, FYI. How you doing, Tom?
I am doing really well. Bracket is looking fairly intact. I mean, as my paraphrase, 3 out of 4 ain't bad. Unfortunately, with a front group pool that we have a couple of folks that were just a touch better than we've been in picking the earlier games. But like you said, you know, we went with the trendy thing, which is to not pick all one seeds. And sure enough, here we are. This is a year where as Macho Man Randy Savage might say, the cream has risen to the crop, or has risen to the top, rather, I should say. So how have we gotten here? What have been some of the big storylines of the tournament? And absolutely, the stars performing, the stars showing out has been a big one. But there's a couple that I kind of find to be particularly interesting. One, a Final Four team, Auburn Tigers, last year going from a disappointing finish. They were a very trendy team last year, especially if you look at some of those advanced analytics, kind of a popular team as, hey, maybe this could be the 4 seed that challenges the ultimate second-time champion UConn Huskies winning their second in a row. Auburn Tigers were a popular pick. They bow out in the first round to the Yale Bulldogs in disappointing fashion. Bruce Pearl returning a good amount of the team, Janai Broome, their star player in particular, getting through all of that stuff. You know, obviously the 1/16, more or less, that is kind of a gimme game out of a few notable exceptions. But it's been a path where, you know, going into the tournament, I thought Auburn's path might be a little bit difficult, and they have answered the bell at every turn to get to this point.
That's my champion. That's in my bracket, original bracket at least.
Exactly, and that's not always something that's easy to do as far as a program goes, to have that sort of expectation and then to not just meet what you were aiming to do last year, but exceed that, frankly. You can't win a championship without getting to the Final Four, without winning your region, and Auburn has absolutely gone and done that. And then I think another team in the Final Four that I think has had a fantastic story has been the Houston Cougars. We're talking about a team that was a 1 seed last year, was looking pretty good, and then Jamal Shed has that injury. I can't remember if it was a calf or a knee or an ankle, but it was a lower body injury against Duke. They end up coming up short, and it just was another kind of just another paragraph in the story of the Houston basketball program under the Kelvin Sampson chapter, of a team that is always good in the advanced analytics, always efficient on offense and on defense, but is always coming up short for some reason or another. They play at too slow of a pace, or somebody important gets injured. For them to reach this point and be in the Final Four, I thought has been a huge story. And then the last one I want to touch on really quickly is how about 3 coaches taking their programs to the Sweet 16? We had the 1 double-digit seed in Arkansas, John Calipari, his first year at Arkansas, making it all the way to the Sweet 16. His replacement at Kentucky, Mark Pope, his first time at Kentucky making it to the Sweet 16, and then his replacement at Brigham Young, Kevin Young, taking the Cougars to the Sweet 16. So that was a nice little, you know, coach musical chairs, some programs that needed a little bit, some by necessity, some by just filling a spot because a coach moved on to a different spot, having a little bit of a fresh a tone, a fresh voice, but still achieving some tournament success, making it to the Sweet 16. Obviously, it's not the ultimate goal, but That's a really important thing for coaches to have for recruiting purposes, for job security purposes. So I think those are probably for me my three biggest stories of the tournament thus far.
Yeah, I kind of have one story kind of wrapped into different stages of the tournament. By the way, Tom, we did go with 3-1 seeds. We actually both doubted Houston. You had Gonzaga beating
Hmm.
them, and I had Tennessee beating them, which looked over after about the first 10 minutes of the game. Because you play Houston and you're down 11. It feels like you're down 20 with
Hmm.
the defense that they play. So, but the biggest story of the tournament, like, this is in some ways, I don't know if it's good, bad, but I'll use the word interesting. To me, it's the lack of upsets. So, like we said, so since the NCAA tournament expanded to 64, now ultimately 68 teams, uh, one time all four one seeds have made the Final Four, 2008. So this is the second time in 40 years, which is pretty unprecedented. Also, not to mention,
Hmm.
the Elite Eight had 4-1 seeds, 3-2 seeds, and 1-3 seed, which is
Hmm.
also crazy. And then also for the first time since the tournament became the way it became more recently, since 75, where they've had a traditional Sweet 16, first time ever, the Sweet 16 featured all power conference teams, not a single small school. It was all the
Hmm.
big dogs, like we expected. You know, we talked about the SEC having a good tournament. They've had a good tournament. We talked about now, Duke having a good tournament. They've had a good tournament. So none of these small schools, the mid majors, not a single mid major school made the Sweet 16. The only double digit seed was Arkansas. And Arkansas is not a 10 seed. They're probably traditionally more like a 6 or 7. They just happen to play in such a good SEC conference that they got so many losses. Had they played in, the ACC, they probably would be a 5 or 6 seed, honestly. Maybe like a 7 or 8 in the
Hmm.
Big Ten. But obviously, Coach Cal with a lot of experience. They did blow that game. They actually should have beaten Texas Tech, which is ironic because Arkansas should have beat Texas Tech. Tech lose, double digit points up with like 4 minutes to go. Then actually Florida should have lost to Tech, who were up 6 with like 3 minutes left. They missed the front end on 2 1-and-1s. But hey, woulda, coulda, shoulda. We're here where we are. It's all the favorites are here. All the underdogs are out. And I have some news that might be disturbing to March Madness fans. Now, look, I'm not going to say every year is going to be all 4-1 seeds. This is unprecedented. It's not going to happen regularly. I'm not saying we're going to have 4-1s, 3-2s, and a 3 in the Elite Eight, or no power, no smaller teams in the Sweet
Hmm.
16. However, we have seen the way college basketball has changed, and that is with the transfer rules and the NIL rules as well. Now players can wait before they had to wait, basically sit on a year to transfer. Now you can transfer immediately, so it makes the transfer option much more wanted. Not to mention the smaller schools, with all the money these players can get paid, you can actually make a lot more money at a big school being the third or fourth or fifth best player, or even the sixth guy off the bench, compared to
Hmm.
being the star player for a small school. So, and a lot of those guys that are the star player for a small school, a lot of them aren't going to go to the NBA or play professionally. At least maybe they play somewhere smaller, and that's their chance to make money.
Hmm.
A small school is not going to have the same amount of money. Whereas you look at a team like, a bigger program that gets that guy, that's that glue guy, that fourth or fifth option, that's the guy that puts them over the top to win the championship. And another advantage that these, smaller schools have is a lot of their players play together 3-4 years. These guys are juniors, they're seniors, they have the tournament experience, the experience of playing together. Well,
Hmm.
now everyone's moving like crazy. I wrote this down. I saw it on ESPN. I don't know. I didn't write it down, excuse me, but there was a record of people entering the transfer portal. It opened up, I think it was Monday of this week, and it more than tripled the previous record. It was
Yeah,
like something like 700 players. Don't quote me on that stat, but it was by
it's a
far
lot.
the record of people in the transfer portal. I mean, UConn coach Dan Hurley talked about it a while back. Like, all my guys are leaving. Coach Cal talked about it. And you're trying to play a tournament, your players are leaving. Yes, we're going to see some upsets. This year was in some sorts of anomaly, but I think we're going to see a lot less upsets going forward with the way college basketball is now, set up with, kids making more money at big schools, kids able to
Hmm.
transfer right away. So just little bracket advice for the future. Pick less upsets going forward, Tom. I don't know if I kind of lean that it's more of a bad thing. Because, I mean, yes, it's a catch 22. You get better games in the Final Four, get
Hmm.
better games in the Elite Eight, you see more stars. But I mean, if you want to see stars, I mean, which, I watch this league, I love the NBA, but that's where the stardom's at. Part of the March Madness tournament is seeing that underdog team come out of nowhere. So overall, this is actually more bad for college basketball than good, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's kind of depending on what you want because I've heard from college basketball fans on both opinions
Yeah,
or both
it's a
sides of that
complicated
opinion.
issue. There's not like an
Right.
easy solution or clear answer. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
because the argument against what you're saying is like, oh, we really want to see McNeese State get blown out by 20 something points, and the answer's been, well, I mean, we've seen some Power Four programs really at this point. I know we're typically say Power Five, but with the Pac-12 gone, it's essentially the Power Four. We've seen some of those teams getting blown out as well, and it's going to be one of those things where because we're kind of getting this stratification of conferences where the SEC set a record number of bids this year. Well, that's because they had teams like Oklahoma and Texas, former Big 12 schools, now
Sure.
representing the SEC. So there's a little bit of a yes, that's a true statistic, but let's look at some of what's behind the truth behind the stat there. And it's one of those things where selection committees going forward are going to have to make that decision of, okay, do we want, let's just say, a Vanderbilt program, or do we want to have I'm trying to think of like a smaller program that may have not made it in, but let's just say, for example, Drake, like a 30 plus win team, had they not won their conference championship, would
Sure.
that team then be able to make it into this tournament? What's the criteria for how teams are going to advance, or is it going to become more and more just, hey, it's going to be all these Power Four schools, and then whoever in the smaller conferences that wins their tournament, they get a little bit of a shot, they get a little bit of a boost. McNeese State here, UC San Diego there, but for the most part, it's just going to be an upset being something along the lines of a Colorado State coming out of the Big West or the Mountain West, excuse me, something along those lines, where
Sure.
they maybe push Maryland for that Sweet 16 bid. So I kind of go back and forth on this one. I'm a fan of being able to look at teams and say, hey, here is a smaller program that I know is returning, player X, Y, and Z. A great example
It's
of
not
recent
happening
vintage.
anymore. Not as much, at least.
Not as much, but like the Loyola Ramblers, for example, that's a team that's of relatively recent vintage where, Porter Moser is their head coach, Cameron Krutwig, the big men in the middle. And you had some smaller, some perimeter players around him, and they were able to have a successful team that, took on a number one Illinois seed in a battle for the state of Illinois. Like there's some smaller programs that were able to make those sorts of runs. I do question if we're going to be seeing that. And I don't necessarily know if better or worse, but just one preference I think is going to go a little bit more by the wayside, simply because, like you said, so many players have that opportunity to go and take that NIL money to go play for another program, because as the commercial likes to say, I think it's like 98% of our athletes are going to go pro in something that's not sports. So this is that
Mhm.
opportunity to kind of
Yeah.
monetize on that. So
And that's the
it's
whole thing. Again, this opens up a whole greater thing.
mhm.
I've always felt a little bit uneasy about the athletes getting paid. Like, I think it's like, again, I look at it this way: life is about compromises. I think it's, if they want to be in a video game, they want to get rights to their name in a video game. Okay, whatever. If they want to, if a local restaurant wants to shoot a
Mhm.
commercial with them, whatever. But I don't like the idea of boosters and schools shelling out any money whatsoever, personally.
Mhm.
And this is where it's created like sort of this division. And I got to see more this time. Again, I'm a little split because on one end, like, the fan in me would say, well, I want one year to have upsets, the next year to have the big dogs like what we have
Mhm.
now. So I'm a little split in terms of like, is that good or bad for college hoops? per se. But yeah, it is definitely like a different age of college
Hmm.
basketball. If you listen to a lot of the coaches talk about it, they don't particularly like it. And something that part of what I don't like too is, let's remember these are college kids. These are not grown men. And I think part of why it rubs me the wrong way, and if you're going to have the NIL, I mean, I don't know if, again, I'm very split on it, but maybe go back to the old rule of you got to sit in a year when you transfer, or go back to the rule of, this transfer portal opens up after the tournament, not
Hmm.
mid tournament. Just because I think we're seeing a lot of kids, part of life is failing. Part of life is failing because, yes, we see some of the smaller school kids transfer, but we also see some of the bigger school kids
Hmm.
who aren't playing minutes at said school transfer to another school. And it's hard to say that it shouldn't happen because I think there's some cases where they're just not a fit with the coach. But I think there's too many cases where these kids are transferring because they're not willing to put the work in. Then they go to the next school and they're not delivering there either.
Hmm.
So in life, like
Yeah.
as soon as something goes wrong, someone doesn't like you, it's like wham wham, let me move on to the next place. And it just again, it's a very, very complicated system. I get that we want to help the athletes. This again, I could have we could have a 3 hour show on this topic, and I'm still not 100% sure. It
Hmm.
just feels like there has to be a little more compromise. The whole like, do we pay an athlete versus not? It's not as simple as yes or no. I feel like there has to be more guidelines, more parameters around it. And I think right now it's creating this field that is even more uneven for, in favor of the big schools.
Yeah, and to be clear, like you said, this is the first time since 2008, second time since the field went to 64 teams at least, that we have had all four one seed. So this year in particular has been very, very chalky. Um, but I think this is something where we should keep an eye into future tournaments. This is something where this is the definition of a small sample size. I mean, my gosh, it was just last year that NC State is an 11 seed. I know, again, a power conference school, but still an 11 seed making it all the way to the Final Four. That was definitely upsets upon upsets with their run that
Yeah,
they
let's see how
had. So
next year goes. Agreed.
this is absolutely something where this could be the start of a different trend. I'll put it that way because again, some folks are going to like that it's going to be the best of the best. Becoming a more professional league. I mean, look at North Carolina's football program hiring Mike Lombardi as a general manager for a college football program
Steph
with
Curry's a general manager at
yeah
Davidson
with
now.
with all of this with more money coming into the game. There's going to be more structure. It's going to be a more professional atmosphere all around. So it might not even be, hey, what do we like or not like, just this is the way that it's going and we're going to have to get on board with it. um, Definitely will be interesting to see though going into the next tournament, what sorts of new things change along the way. But one thing that never changes with any NCAA tournament is the stars. And that's where we are going to go next on this one. And I mean, I'm probably going to be keeping it fairly, at the top because, like you said, we haven't had a whole lot of like the big underdog moments coming through. But you look at like say Patrick Queen of the Maryland Terrapins, the Crab Five. I think that Maryland was on the losing end of like 5 or 6 buzzer beaters or something like that this season. Just like an incredibly anomalous amount of losses on that last second shot, and him coming up with a big shot in the moment. I thought he
I think the
was
only buzzer beater of the tournament.
um, by definition, yes.
Yeah,
I
I
know
know
that
we had the first
Houston.
4 game where it was less than a second or whatever.
Right, and then like Houston with that one over Purdue was like a really quick bucket. I think it wasn't like
Yeah,
technically a buzzer beater, but essentially that was
sure.
what caused called game. But I think that there's been a couple few stars. I mean, we've mentioned Janai Broom to this point. He got injured a little bit today, came back and hit a big three, made a big
Yeah,
defensive stop. I mean, he's been
hopefully he'll be
absolutely
ready.
phenomenal. Mark Sears for Alabama has been pretty consistent in the tournament and hitting 10 threes uh, in that game. Was just absolutely unconscious against the BYU Cougars. He had a pretty strong tournament. Duke, of course, shutting him down in that last game, but that doesn't take away, I don't think, from a phenomenal tournament. You look at a JT Toppin from Texas Tech. I mean, 4 double doubles. Certainly not the reason that they had that they came up short. He was a
You haven't
big
even
part of
listed the
their.
biggest star of the tournament yet, in my
Go
opinion.
ahead. Who do you think's
Florida's
been
Walter Clayton Jr., which is a guy that
phenomenal?
I highlighted, by the way, when we had this
Hmm.
debate. I highlighted actually 3 guys, and those are the 3 guys I've written down because I think Walter Clayton Jr., 30 points against Texas Tech in the Elite Eight, hit so many clutch threes in that game. They do not win the game without him. In
No.
fact, they wouldn't have beaten UConn either. They would have been out in the second game because he also hit a bunch of clutch threes against UConn. 23 points against UConn. He hit 30 against Tech, like I said. 23 in the opener. He's averaging 22 points per game, shooting 45% from three, 88.6% from the free throw line. Now, I know he's not like the biggest guy, but he looks like an NBA player because, a lot of guys in college will shoot open threes, rhythm threes. This guy shoots threes off the dribble, and you can tell that he is not the least bit afraid of the moment. I mean, literally, he has won his team 2 games. Florida
Hmm.
would have been eliminated twice if it wasn't for this kid. He's got ice water in his veins. He's super clutch. He can shoot. He can pass. He has been the biggest star of this tournament at this point for Florida. He is just absolutely terrific. I mean, 45% from three. That is efficient, man. The kid is the real deal. I mean, you mentioned Janai Broom, 22 and 16 against Michigan,
Hmm.
25 and 14 against Michigan State. This guy is an absolute beast. I actually took a screenshot. There's some sort of graphic. I'm gonna put up my phone here, Tom. 'Cause I saw this. So he is career 2,500 points and 1,500 rebounds. NCAA all time, one of 4 guys to do it. Dickie Hemrick, Elgin Baylor, Alvin Hayes, and Janai Broom. So the kid is
Two Hall of
awesome. He's
Famers
a
in there.
lefty.
Yeah.
Again, he may not be a megastar in the NBA, but he is a megastar in college. And of course, the megastar that's going to be probably a star in the NBA as well.
Hmm.
Cooper Flagg, averaging 19.5 points, 7.8 rebounds, 5.3 assists, and 1.8 blocks. More importantly, he showed up in the biggest game where they needed him to show up. That was the Arizona game. That was the one close game Duke has played this whole tournament, and
Hmm.
he put up 30 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds, and 3 blocks. This dude is an absolute stat stuffer, and he's got a really good feel for the game. He's a really good passer. He's in many ways unselfish. I mean, he kind of does whatever his team needs him to do. Like I said it before the tournament. He is very good at everything. He's
Hmm.
not great in any one area, but when you're very good at everything you do, you have no weakness and you're extremely smart as a basketball player. And I kind of think of it too like Dwayne Wade was the master of this when Dwayne Wade played Tom. He
Hmm.
was really, and he knew when to take over and when to step back. It seemed like he always made the right decision when he was in his prime. That's how it feels like watching Cooper Flagg because sometimes he'll be okay passing the ball around, letting his teammates do their thing. But whenever the team needs it, he says, "Get in my back, boys. Get in my back. Let
Hmm.
me do my thing." I really like Cooper Flagg. Seems like a really nice kid as well. Just a very humble star. He's absolutely been the star of the tournament, and we've kind of like hadn't had that in recent years. The whole like freshman that shines. I mean, a lot of these freshmen have been knocked out early.
Hmm.
We had Zion Williamson. I remember a few years back got knocked out like relatively earlier in the tournament. We haven't had like that marquee superstar that everyone is hyped up and they have delivered in the tournament. Well, he's coming off an injury and he has very much delivered. And actually, his worst game was the last game. I think he's going to bounce back. He's going to have himself a heck of a semifinal and championship game. Oh, did I give away my pick already? Well, my bad. But yeah, Cooper Flagg is absolutely the real deal. No doubt about that. I mean, Walter Clayton Jr., Cooper Flagg, Janai Broom, these are all American players.
Mhm.
and they have lived up to it and then some in this tournament for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's move from the stars to these star-studded matchups. We'll begin with Auburn and Florida because that has been uh, just like an absolute titan collision on the left side of the bracket. Two powerhouses from the SEC, a conference that has represented itself pretty well, I would say.
Yeah,
Um,
you
but
think?
it's been an absolute phenomenal run for both of these teams. Florida, like you said, has had a bit of a dicier path getting here with a couple of close games along the way. But uh, dare I say that they have the best individual player? It's a little bit difficult going cross positional or cross, big man to guard type of situation. But I mean, I think that for me, I had Florida winning this matchup because I had Florida over Auburn in this very Final Four matchup. And just watching how Walter Clayton has played, and I also want to highlight the coaching really quickly. If we want to talk about stars, the coaches of the teams that have gotten to the Final Four this year, Florida being down 10 points with as little time as was left against Texas Tech, and just I don't know what Todd Golden said in those huddles, or if it was just like get Walter Clayton the ball, but
Sure.
something clicked, something switched. That team did not panic, and that takes really good coaching, especially for, like you were saying, non-professional basketball players to stay that cool, calm, collected, and just hit three after three after three to get themselves back into the game. A lot of times, college teams, when they're down by that kind of margin, are just chucking up threes. But this felt like very, very precise, just scalpel-like precision. I think Florida has a lot of good size to go ahead and bang it with the Auburn big men down in the post to try to neutralize a little bit Janai Broome. I'm not sure what Auburn's answer is going to be for Walter Clayton Jr. I don't know if there is necessarily an answer for Walter Clayton Jr. other than, gee, I hope he misses this one. He has been that good throughout this tournament, especially when they need him to be. I know he didn't necessarily have a great game. I think it was against Maryland, but that was also a game where Florida was up by a
They were in
decent margin, so
control.
he didn't have to be the hero.
Sure.
If I'm saying like, hey, this is going to be a close game because I think it's going to be a very close game, what player's going to step up and be the hero? I think it's going to be Walter Clayton. I think Florida's just a little bit too big, a little bit too deep, a little bit too talented in a very, very close matchup against a very worthy opponent in the Auburn Tigers.
Yeah, just to clarify, we both had this matchup in our
Mm-hmm.
bracket, and you had Florida advancing. I had Auburn advancing. It's two extremely evenly matched teams. Auburn won the SEC regular season 15-3. Florida was second, 14-4, but they won the SEC tournament. We're spending a lot of time talking about Janai Broome and Walter Clayton Jr.,
Mm-hmm.
rightfully so. These guys are mega stars, but they have really good teammates. Auburn has
For sure.
5 guys that averaged double figures this year. Florida has 4 guys and a fifth guy that was 9.8.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, both squads have 5 guys that can score double figures. Both squads have guys that they can rely on if their superstars not delivering. I mean, Florida did win the earlier season matchup 90-81. I don't know if I would read too much into that matchup, but I always say if you beat a team by 20 or 30, there's something to be said about the matchup, but if it's a relatively close game, you could argue that the team that lost can make adjustments. So I'm not focusing too much on that game necessarily. I mean, it's like Auburn has looked better overall this tournament. Like you said, Florida probably should have lost to Texas Tech. I mean, they really should have. And I know they
Mm-hmm.
made a lot of threes down the stretch. I'm not saying they didn't, but if Texas Tech makes their free throws, they win the game.
Right.
They missed 2 front ends of a one-on-one. That's kind of, I don't want to use the word inexcusable, but I mean it's pretty bad in that scenario. So I think Auburn's looked a little bit better this tournament. It's tough, man. It's just tough. I had a hard time picking this game the first time around
Mm-hmm.
as well. Um, I'm going to lean Auburn just because I think in these close games, Florida, I don't want to use the word dig themselves a hole because they weren't down like a crazy amount, but they dug themselves a hole a little bit against Texas Tech.
Mm-hmm.
They're a second half team. They got to show up the first half because
Yes.
Auburn can run them out of the building the first half. And that, if Auburn's up like 1 or 2 at halftime, maybe advantage Florida. But if it's like a 5, 6 point game, it's going to be tough against that Auburn team that has two big guys that can physically beat up anybody. They have outside shooting. Baker Mazzara is a great player. Ultimately, look, every young star has their breakout moment. I mean, Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, we wouldn't have known Tom Brady was going to be Tom Brady, Tom. But I look, Todd Golden's a terrific coach. He's done a terrific job at Florida. But that's the one thing, the one teeny tiny question mark, maybe teeny tiny advantage. You look at Bruce Pearl, a guy that now is in his second Final Four. He's a terrific basketball coach. I think in many ways, very underrated, underappreciated, like we talked about in our March Madness preview. Sort of, you got a little blacklisted for a while after some recruiting things. Then he worked his way up, and now he's got this Auburn team just clicking on all cylinders. I
Mhm.
trust Bruce Pearl a little bit more as a coach. Auburn, again, a team that is very much together from last year. And of course, just a feel. I did pick them in my bracket. So if it's this close, I'm going to lean Auburn. Bruce Pearl, I think, will be a difference maker. Again, Walter Clayton Jr. is phenomenal, very reliant on threes. Do they come up with a game plan to limit him a little bit, do a couple shots, not fall? Because Jedi Broom's going to bang down low. He's going to get his no matter what. That's the other X factor, though, because is he going to be healthy? Because he injured his
Mhm.
shoulder. If he is 100%, I like Auburn. But if he's like 70 or 80, or do I dare say 60%,
That can be tough.
Florida could very easily win this game. This is not one that I'll be betting my life savings on. I'll put it that way, Tom. It is very, very toss-up-y. Let me see if there's a line released yet on it. Because I'm
I
guessing it's
imagine
going
there
to be
has
pretty
to have
close.
been.
Let's see. Let's see if I'm looking up on my phone. Looks like see, my guess was going to be Florida -1. It's Florida -2.5.
I was thinking
So
about that. Yeah, like I was thinking about probably two or three, something in that ballpark.
yeah, so Florida's a slight favorite, but I'll go Auburn.
Hmm.
But I'm far from convinced. I'll be completely honest. I don't advise anybody to bet their mortgage on this one, Tom.
Nor should anybody bet their mortgage on anything ever, just for like safe gambling
Yes. Just
whatevers.
to clarify, I do not endorse
Yes.
anyone betting their mortgage. It's more of an inside joke.
Yeah, sure.
Call it the
Yeah.
mortgage bet. More of an inside joke. But I do think the next matchup, Duke -4.5, man. Don't bet the mortgage, but I feel a lot
Mm.
more confident in this game, Tom, than I do the other game.
I would say that this one's going to go one of two ways. I'm picking
Okay?
Duke to win because I picked Duke to make it to the championship
So did
as
I.
well in the bracket prior to the
Sure.
tournament starting. I think that if we're using that line, it's either going to be Duke by more than that margin or Houston winning it outright. I think that that's probably the two likely outcomes in my opinion, and that's because, like I said, Houston has this reputation of being this slower paced team, and something always comes up, and bites them in the heel heading down the stretch. And sometimes
Tar
it's just
Heel?
it could be, but it's. I'm hoping that it's just going to be a case of like a really really good game this go around because Houston's just had I think far too many bad things happen to them, but they definitely have I think there's a lot of star power in this one, or actually probably more star power on the Duke side of things. But looking at what Houston has with that three guard lineup of Cryer, Sharp, and Uzon, where you've got three guys shooting better than 30% beyond the arc, that's going to be a challenge that Duke I think should probably be up to defending. I mean, we talk about Cooper Flag and his all around stats. Well, I think one of the defining plays that he had in that Alabama game was when he was guarding Mark Spears one on one and outmoved him, got position, got the turnover, in a pretty pivotal moment for Alabama as they were trying to make a comeback and basically just a great defensive possession all around by Duke. It's not often that you see a star-studded team also dedicated on the defensive side of the ball. And to a man, every single Duke Blue Devil player is gritty, is hard nosed, is going to be playing that level of defense I know that this is going to be just an absolutely tough matchup, and it could very well just come down to the fickleness of 3-point shooting. You know, if LJ Cryer has a great game like he had against Gonzaga, Houston could very well be in the championship game. But if he's a little bit colder, like he was against Tennessee, didn't have an outstanding performance. Duke is the type of team that has enough offensive firepower to overcome, unlike Tennessee, where Tennessee was fairly efficient, but definitely a more defense heavy team. Duke is better than them in that regard and is equally as good on defense. So this could just be a little bit, too much of a challenge for Houston, in my opinion. But it's definitely going to be a really, really fun matchup. I mean, looking at Kamen Malawak against Quan Roberts, that's going to be, or excuse me, Jawan Roberts, that's going to be a phenomenal matchup of big men right there. So I think that if I'm going one way or another, I think Duke is just a little bit deeper and a little bit more star power driven than Houston. But this is another one where, like I said, if it's a close game, I think Houston's going to win. I think Duke's going to have to win by multiple possessions in this one to go to the championship game.
I feel a lot more confident in Duke than you do, Tom, personally. And I actually think they're very capable of winning a close game as well. They
Mhm.
haven't had many close games this year. They've blown out teams like crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
like record-setting amount of blowouts this year. They're just absolutely cruised through this tournament. Obviously a weak ACC conference, but they've proven that it's not just the conference. They're just that dang good against
Hmm.
everybody that they play. Obviously, a matchup of two different styles. Duke averaged about 83.7 points a game this year, ninth in the nation, averaging 91.7 this tournament. 92 points a game in the NCAA tournament. Meanwhile, Houston allows just 58.5 points per game. The number one defense in the country. Duke will want to get out in transition, throw around some dunks, use their athleticism, whereas Houston wants to completely slow the game down, which is, another intriguing look is the over-under is 136 and a half. And it's like,
Hmm.
who's going to control the tempo? And I do think it's going to be different because I think Duke will shoot quickly when they have the ball, and Houston will take forever when they have the ball. Now, I think the problem for Houston is they have to keep it close early because if Duke goes up 7, 8 points, 9 points, 10 points in the first half, human nature will say Houston's going to have to start going quicker on offense. So the first half is going to
Mhm.
be very, very key in this game.
Yeah.
But Duke has a couple big guys. That's what I like about them. Cooper Flag, and then their other guy that you mentioned, also a mock round first round draft pick. They have a couple big guys, so even if threes aren't falling, they're a team that can go to the basket and they can post up. They can use their size, which makes them more well rounded. And then we have guys like Knuble and Tyrese Proctor, who, by the
Hmm.
way, is making 64% of threes in the NCAA tournament. I mean, and he's not even, they have 3 first round picks according to the NBA mock draft. And Tyrese Proctor, who was probably their second best player as a college player, maybe third best,
I'd say
but
third, probably. Yeah.
he is really, really good. So they have just multiple ways to beat you. They have multiple guys that can beat you, but they have shot blocking on defense too, though. They have star power all over the court. I mean, they have the most talented team in the country, and it's not that Houston can't score. Like I said, you said it. They're fairly efficient. Their lower points per game is more due to the tempo, so to speak. But I don't think they have enough firepower
Hmm.
against Duke. I really don't. They had enough against Purdue. They had enough against Gonzaga. Tennessee, by the way, was just cold in this game. I mean, Tennessee was
Yeah.
historically cold in the first half. You take out the first 10 minutes of the game, that was a pretty evenly matched game for 3/4 of it. Just Tennessee was not knocking down shots. Duke is not going to go that cold. And if they are that cold, plan B, go bang inside and score. So I do like Duke, and I feel fairly confident. Again, one game scenario, Tom, anything can happen. There's no
Hmm.
such thing as a lock in the tournament, but I feel pretty good about Duke winning, and I feel pretty good about Duke covering as well, knocking out Houston.
So that takes us to the championship, a championship that you and I are both projected. Both of us have had Duke there. We had different opponents for Duke and certainly different results as to who the champion is going to be cutting down the nets. I mean, for me, uh, there's nothing that I've seen out of Duke that really makes me feel like I should divert from my original pick
Sure.
of selecting them as the national champion. John Shire's done a great job with recruiting a great team, but it's a really balanced team throughout. Cooper Flag listed as a forward, but is really good with handling the basketball. You've got when he's on the court with Knipple, Proctor, James. You've got four really good ball handlers, and the
Nipple is
number of
really good
just
too. That kid can play ball.
yeah, and just like the number of easy lobs to Malawak have been, reminiscent of playing, NCAA March Madness 2004, the PS2 game with Carmelo Anthony on the cover, and basically it's just you get somebody near the rim, you just hit that little, I think it was the R2 button
R2
is what
lob.
gave the alley oop lob, and that was just automatic points every single time. It kind of feels like that's the offense at least at times that Duke is able to run, where it's just easy basket after easy basket. I think at this point, those easy baskets definitely go by the wayside because there is a step up in class from, Baylor and then Arizona and then Alabama as far as interior defense goes. But the fact that you have, four guys who are capable of putting, pinpoint precision for those easy baskets, which are going to be so, so precious at this stage of the tournament. Flag has been an all-around outstanding player, and he's the type of player that I do wonder, with less talent around him, how much better would his statistics look?
Much better.
How much does he look like a really good player in all these areas, but not necessarily great in any one area because he is able to lean on so many other players? I mean, I think looking at
And he's
uh,
unselfish too, Tom.
exactly. I mean, looking at the minutes per game, so 48 or 40 minutes in a college basketball game, he's leading Duke with an average of 30 and a half minutes per game. So if he's on a program where he's, the star and there's maybe one or two other decent players with him, he's probably playing closer to 34, 35 minutes a
Because they're
game.
up 20 or 30 points a lot of times. There's
Exactly.
4 minutes to go in the game.
And
He's not
there's
in the game when they're up
and there's
30.
enough talent on Duke that even if it's not that big of a margin, John Sherry can say, "Yeah, take your usual rotation, take your 2, 3, 4 minutes out, catch your breath, so that you're super fresh going down the stretch when we really, really need you for the big moments." So this is a team that really doesn't miss much of a beat whenever it's rotating it out its biggest stars. I think that none of these games are going to be easy, but definitely Duke has proven at every step here that they can meet every challenge in front of them. Going to have two significant challenges coming up with Houston and then I believe Florida, but I think Duke is a team that's going to be cutting down the nets this year.
Yeah, so I have Duke and Auburn as my matchup, which is a very interesting matchup because Auburn has some transfer players. They have
Mhm.
some guys that are 3 and 4 star recruits. I think they have like a D2 guys as well on the team. They're kind of like that team with a chip on their shoulder, and they have like some good players. Like Janai Broom transferred from a really small school, Tom. He was just a small school guy. He was not a big recruit. Like their guys are not labeled as NBA stars. They
Mhm.
might have, one or two guys might make a team, but nobody in their team is. I looked it up. They don't have a single guy that's mock draft in the first round next year.
Mm.
It's kind of like a team that is playing with a chip on their shoulder, which is kind of like how Bruce Pearl was as well. Because again, with his
Sure.
past issues, he's a guy that likes to yell. He's very animated. I've never heard a coach yell more than him. I used to cover SEC hoops, and he was by far the wildest. It's not even even like not always like bad yelling because we think of like yelling like Bob Knight a psycho. He's even yelling like encouraging things though. He's like he's just
Mhm.
nonstop yelling the whole game. He's yelling at somebody all the time. So they're a very scrappy team. I think they were the best team for much of the year. They faded a little bit at the end, but they spent the most time ranked first overall in the country. They are technically the number one overall seed, even though Duke is the betting favorite, Florida's the second, Auburn's the third, but they're all like pretty close. There's not like a heavy favorite. So like I was thinking I was going to pick Auburn. I still think Auburn could win. I think Florida could win. I think
Mhm.
Duke could win. I put it this way. I put it three teams I think have a really good chance to win that would not surprise me. Houston's the only team that would surprise me if they cut down the Nets, Tom. But I'm going to go ahead and make an amendment, especially now that in our bracket, the best I can do is get second place. So I'm going to make an amendment because, again, it's easy to think about past history when it doesn't have to do anything with the current team. And that was kind of my thought. Like Auburn's got all this experience, all these upperclassmen, all these guys, whereas Duke's, stars, freshmen, their biggest stars are freshmen. One of their other biggest stars, freshmen.
Mhm.
We've seen a lot of Duke freshmen, UNC, Kentucky over the years, where that system has failed. But the more I've been watching this tournament, the more I hear John Shire speak, I've heard him mention this multiple times. We built this team with the NCAA tournament in mind. That's what he said. He felt that the team fell short last year. John Shire, by the way, has won a championship as a player with Duke, so he knows a thing or two about what it takes to win a March Madness tournament. He has said it multiple times that he built this team with the tournament in mind. And the more you watch this team, the more you realize that he knew what he was talking about because that's
Mhm.
what they look like. They look like the best team. I want to pick Auburn in my bracket because that's who I have.
Sure.
I also I kind of like Florida with Clayton Jr. as well. I mean, and even Houston overcoming odds. Like Duke is not necessarily the team I'm cheering for, with more of a casual UNC fan. I'm not going to say I'm diehard UNC, but you know
Mhm.
me, Tom. I'm a UNC fan. So the fan in me is inclined to cheer against Duke. But I think having watched the tournament, it's almost like that sort of undeniable eye test. Now, again, one game, they can go cold. Anybody can lose.
Sure.
But if this were a 7-game series against any team, Duke would win because they have the best team and they work well together. You can see it because, one game, this guy's the star. The next game, this guy's the star. There's not there's not an ego feel to Duke, which is credit goes to Cooper Flag because this kid, he doesn't have that ego. He doesn't have to
Mhm.
score 30 points. He can, but he can also score 16 points against Alabama and not force the ball when it hasn't been his day. So it just feels like Duke is the best team. So I'm going to flip my pick, and I'll pick the Duke Blue Devils. That's my surprise, Tom. That is my
There
bracket
we go.
surprise for you. The other reason I'm picking Duke, which again, we probably are not going to have a show before the Final
Mhm.
Four. Um, the other reason why I'm picking Duke is I look at the Florida Auburn game and I look at it as such a toss up. I think either team can win that game. So picking either team to me when they might lose the next game just feels more risky. Whereas I am very confident in Duke
Sure.
over Houston, Tom. So I think we have the 4 best teams in the tournament, but I do
Mhm.
place Houston for me like number 4. I look at Duke is 1, and then I
Mhm.
look at Florida and Auburn are like
Very
virtual
close.
tie for
Sure.
second, and then Houston I think is still very good, very capable. They earned the 1 seed, but I have them as my more clear 4th best team in the country. If we're looking at these teams, like we had like a 7-game series, I would be pretty comfortable in picking Florida or Auburn to beat Houston personally. So
Would you like to hear what how Ken Palm has them ranked really quick?
yeah, Ken Palm I think has um let me guess. I
Sure.
think you talked about it last week. So Ken Palm I think has
So really quickly,
Houston probably
Ken
2.
Ken Palm is an iterative thing, so it has been adjusting as the tournament's going along. So it's not static to where it was when we
So
talked
is it
about
for the
it.
whole season or just the
It's for
tournament?
the whole season up to and including the tournament to this point.
Okay,
So
so they
number
probably
one,
have Duke 1,
uh
Houston 2, Florida 3 and Auburn 4.
you nailed it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So I know you're Mr. Ken Palm. So I have something that Ken Palm doesn't have apparently. Eyes, baby. I got eyes. And my eyes tell me that Houston is the fourth best team, Tom. But you know me, I like offense. I don't like the
Mhm.
slow tempo. So maybe
Sure.
there's a bias in there. Take it with a grain of salt. But just with what I've seen, how I've seen I mean, Houston was not convincing against Purdue. They were not
Mhm.
convincing against Gonzaga. They really, again, I'm not saying their defense was not great, but Tennessee just they had some open shots that they missed. It was just a bad game for Tennessee.
Mhm.
I mean, I think Tennessee and Houston to me are, you know, Tennessee, Houston, Alabama. Those to me are like that next tier that are all pretty close, depending on the day. So
Tennessee number 5
yeah,
on Ken Palm.
well, makes sense because I like Tennessee's team. They had a bad game, Tom. Sometimes you just have a bad
Mhm.
game. Tennessee had a bad game against Houston, that's for sure.
Indeed.
So
Well, it's been a very, I think it's been a pretty riveting tournament to this point. I'm glad that we have the amazing matchups that we do heading into the Final Four and eventually the championship. Definitely a worthy denouement for the season, I would
a
say.
worthy what?
Denouement. It's like the crescendo moment. The
Okay, all right, crescendo.
yeah,
That makes sense. See, we need to do more of these shows
crowning
because I feel
achievement.
like my vocabulary has been suffering without you, Tom. Maybe we should do a thing where you text me a word of the day or something. Because I wanna be like
Oh, I
I
don't
wanna
know if
feel
I have that
smart.
many words.
Word of the
Uh,
week then, maybe.
Yeah, word of the yeah, denouement by textbook definition is the final part of a play, movie, or narrative in which the strands of the plot are drawn together and matters are explained or resolved.
That's where we're at when it comes to
That's
March
exactly where
Madness.
we're at.
And
And
my
then we'll
only
get
hope is
one
to
shining
see,
moment.
yeah, One Shining Moment. I love that song, the video at the end. I look forward to that even more than the games, Tom. Honestly, I
Hmm.
love One Shining Moment. But my only hope for this is that all the superstars show up. I want to see Cooper Flagg have a good game. I want to see Walter Clayton Jr., Janai Broom,
Hmm.
everybody. Just I want all the guys to play their best. I don't want to have a Tennessee moment where I feel like it's a good basketball team that just did not play good. I want to
Right.
see all these teams at their absolute best, and that's why I'm picking Duke. If all these teams play their absolute best, Duke should win. They have the most talent, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, well, hey Tom, great show. We'll check in here the next few weeks. We've been busy. I'm actually very busy at work. A lot of stuff going on. But whether hopefully we can get some sort of NFL draft and
Of
NBA
course.
playoffs preview, we'll work that out. We haven't done an MOB preview either, but I'm not against doing that at some point, even early in the season.
Hmm.
I'm going to pick the Dodgers. So what's the point anyway? But I'm looking forward to chatting. Eventually, when maybe we do some NFL stuff as well. It's
Hmm.
been a wild off season to say the
Hmm.
least. We still don't know where Aaron Rodgers is, though. He still does not have a home yet at this moment. But Tom, thank you again for a great show today. Appreciate taking the time. Let's see how right or wrong we are. Gotta say, we're pretty good. Our brackets are pretty
Pretty
good.
good.
They're looking pretty good. Let's see what happens next week. And have a good one, Tom. Thank you again for co-hosting. Thank you to all our listeners and viewers. You guys are the best. And we'll see ya when we see ya.